In the previous episodes, we've seen how to set up Phoenix LiveView, built a counter, which is like the Hello World code example in the LiveView world, and we've taken a look at the live cycle, inspecting the WebSocket messages, having a glimpse of how the things work under the hood. It's now time to build the gallery app. For simplicity, we are not going to use any database. Our images will be just a fixed set of URLs taken from the Unsplash website. So we start by using the counters code we've seen in the previous episode. At the moment, we just aim to get something working, like a draft of the gallery. We'll spend time later to refactor the code and add more functionalities. So to use the gallery live model, I've just copied the counter live code inside here, but this is just the counter code we've seen before. As you can see, this is our counter. So let's consider we have a fixed list of images. Like we did for the counter, we now want to increment and decrement an index to go through the images of our gallery. So we see that at the beginning, the index is 0 and points to the first image. By increasing it, the index will then point to the second, the third image. And once reached the end of the list, it will go back to the first image. So let's start by renaming counter to index, which better represents what this value is for. So it starts from 0. Let's say index here, and the label index. We then remove this button and we add two new buttons. Phoenix click. So the event is, the first one is previews, button, and the second one is next. So with this button previews, we want to decrement the index, and with next, we want to increment the index. So this handle event is going to be, previews. So we update the index and we say -1. Next is really similar. And so next, we increment the index. Let's refresh and we see that it works. Something I prefer to do, maybe it's not obvious right now because we just have in our logic, we have just an update function. I usually tend to move the logic inside this callback to a separate function. This makes the handle event callback cleaner, and it also, if we name correctly, like assign prev index that accept a socket, we put it here, maybe with a pipe. So this makes also clearer to me what this handle function does. So assign prev index socket. Let's do it also for next. So assign next index and socket. So this function accepts a socket, updates the index and returns a socket. So this is why we can just put it inside here, passing the socket. So let's see now how to dynamically show the images. So let's define a new function called image, which, so the argument is an index and it returns the URL of an image. In this case, we use, for simplicity, just a fixed list of images. And so, okay. So, and we use enum at passing the index. So in this way, what we do is if the index is 0, first element is returned. If we have a negative index, it will reverse. So for example, -1, it will be this element, the last element of the list, -2, the element before. And obviously, if the index is 1, is the second element. So it starts counting from 0. Let's start the interactive Elixir console. And let's see if we have a list, if we don't know the at function. So if we have a list, and we can use enum at, so 0 is A, if we do -1 is C, if is 1 is B, if we have 10 is nil, because we have just 3 elements in our list. So we'll see how to deal with this issue later. So just by using the image function, we can now define in our template an image tag, and we use the image function passing the index. And let's refresh. And we see that now, using the buttons, we can go back and forth our gallery. And obviously, when we go out of the list, like the index 8, it doesn't work. So let's consider again the list of 3 letters, ABC. So with 2, it returns the last element of the list, and with 3, the index 3 is out of bound, so it returns nil. So how to go back here to A? We can use the reminder, which returns the reminder of the integer division. So for example, if we have the reminder of 3, and we have 3 elements of 3, it returns 0. So 4, 1, 5, 6, back to 0. So 3 is the number of elements in the list, and this is our index. So back to at, we can use reminder of, so we say 2 and 3. So you see that C, A, B, etc. and C goes back to A. And obviously it works with negative number as well. So -3 goes back to A. So let's move this list. Here we say images, okay? And we also want to do images count and count images. So this count will be compiled at compile time. So it will not be calculated every time we call image. So we calculate the new index, reminder, the index, and images count. And we return enum at images index. So remember that we're using a list to make the implementation simple, but inside image and these other functions, we could have a total different implementation that would deal, for example, with a database. So instead of the index, we could have an ID. Remember also that a list in Elixir is a linked list. So all the operations like at and count can be expensive if this list is big, like thousands of elements. Because every time we do a count or an at, it has to go through the list. Let's see if it works. You see that it goes back, and let's see also on the other side, previews 0, and it goes back. You See? The next step is to do a bit of refactoring, which will make easier to add thumbnails and a slideshow functionality. It would be nice to uncouple a bit the gallery logic from the LiveView part, moving it to a different module called gallery. In this module, we are going to implement these functions, and we start with the last one, image URL. Instead of the URLs, we are going to use just the image IDs. If we see our URLs, we see that are pretty similar because there is always the base URL, which is the Unsplash. What changes is the image ID. We just need the image ID to identify the image, and we can pass H and W, for example, parameters to set the width and the height we want. In this way, with just the image ID, we can build an image URL for a thumbnail or an image URL for a large image. So we start by defining this function image URL and just passing the image ID and the parameters. We build the URL for a thumbnail or a URL for the large image. So we also add the Unsplash URL, the base URL. So we use the URI module. We parse the Unsplash URL and we merge it with the image ID. So we see that URI parse returns a URI struct, and URI merge, like photo ID, sets this ID in path. URI encode query encodes the params map, so like W100, H high 500, to a query string, and this string is the query value. So taking this pipeline, we can do map put query, and we, for example, set these parameters, and we get this URI struct. And if we want to convert this URI struct to a string, which is our final URL, we just use URI to string. So now we do map put query, URI encode query, params, and then we convert it to a string. Then image IDs just returns the IDs. So let's try image IDs, this function, and enum map gallery image URL. This is the image ID and our params like W500 and only W500, and we get our URLs. Instead of dealing with an index directly, incrementing and decrementing it, we define next image ID and next index. So next image ID is the function we want to use in Gallery Live, and just passing the ID, it returns the next ID in the IDs list. So let's uncomment this, define, and we define a default list, which is this. So if we pass a list, this can be useful if you want to use a different list. It returns enum at IDs, next index, IDs ID. So it uses this function, and this function actually returns the next ID of the ID we pass. So what it does is to find the ID in the list, in the IDs list, for example, the first one, and it returns the index of the next one. We need first to find the index of this element inside this list. So we enumerate the IDs list with enum find index, and we pass a function, and with this function we find the element that is equal with ID, and when found this function returns the index. Like we did before, we want to increment it by 1. So if we want to keep this pipe form, we use the kernel plus function and we add 1. Then, so if for example the ID is the last one, we want to go back and return 0. And then if the index is out of bound, we have to be sure that goes back to 0. So rem and enum count IDs. So we can do this, but we can also use here in at a default value. So instead of using rem, the third argument can be a default value if this index is out of bound. So we can do list first IDs, or since we need also this first IDs function, so IDs and a default, we can define it, and so we do list first IDs. We will need this in gallery live, and we can use this IDs. Let's see a little bit the functions we've built. Gallery, so we have image IDs, so these are our IDs, and we have gallery next image ID. So if we pass just this first ID, it will use the default IDs list, which is this, and will return the next element. So if we use it again, we see it returns the third. And let's see if it goes back returning this one. It's exactly what we need. We also have gallery first ID, which returns the first element of the IDs list. And we just need now to implement prevImageID and prevIndex functions, which are really similar to nextImageID and nextIndex. So we can actually delete these and copy and paste these two functions, and we say prev, and here is prevIndex, and here is -1. So in this case, we don't even need this default value, because prevIndex shouldn't return an index out of bound. Because if we pass this ID, prevIndex returns -1, but -1 is fine with enum at just reverse the IDs and returns the last element. It's now time to change our gallery live model, so we can delete these, and okay, we can remove this function, and let's start with mount. So mount, instead of the index, we just want the current ID, current ID, and we use gallery first ID. So this is why we want to start from the first ID. So image ID, current ID. Then in the template, we use gallery. We could use image URL passing the parameters, but it's better to add two functions here. So the functions are thumbnail URL, thumb URL. So with ID and image URL, and we say the ID and say the width of 100, height of 100, and another option, fit crop. And large URL with a height of 500 and width is auto. So here we use large URL and we pass current ID, and then we need to change this function. So let's call it assign priv ID, next ID, and what we do is to update not the index but the current ID. So what we do is to assign socket current ID, and we use our gallery module prev image ID, and we pass socket assigns current ID. And here is prev ID, next ID, and it's similar to this, but is next image ID. So by refreshing, we should have a similar result, but this time we have an image ID and it works like before. So with the gallery module now it's really easy to add the thumbnails, because let's add a center tag, and here we use a comprehension. So for ID we use gallery image IDs to have our, so we enumerate the image IDs list, do, and here we have an image tag for our thumbnail. So we say gallery thumb URL and we pass the ID and we close the tag. We refresh the page and we have our thumbnails here, but are not really useful. Maybe it would be nicer to see which image is selected. And we add thumb CSS class, which returns a CSS thumb selected class when thumb ID and current ID are equal, or thumb unselected when are not equal. So here we add a class attribute and we use this function and we pass the ID and the current ID. We go in app CSS and we add this CSS for the two classes. Refreshing the page, we see that only the current image is selected. And let's now add the slideshow option. So we want a new socket with two assigns. One is current ID, so we say socket, and the second is our slideshow, and our default value is stopped, and we return the new socket. Then we remove the label, we don't need it anymore, and so we group together the buttons and we add a new button called play and stop. So we have a if condition. So if slideshow, the value slideshow is stopped, we show a play button, which when clicked send a play slideshow event, or instead a stop button which sends a stop slideshow event. Then we handle the first event, play slideshow, which starts our slideshow socket, and we start the slideshow using timer send interval every 1 second, self slideshow next. So this function will start an interval that sends every second to this process at slideshow next message, and it returns a tuple, okay, and reference, and we are going to use this reference to cancel this interval when the stop button is clicked. And then we return a no reply, and we assign, it's important to keep this reference, so we assign slideshow the reference. So since we changed slideshow, now is not stopped, but it's equal to the reference, and this button will be shown. We also need to write the callback handle info to handle this message. So handle info, and we handle this message. The second argument is the socket, and we just need to no reply. So we need to just use this assign next ID socket. We go to the next image. Then we need also to handle the event when the stop button is clicked. So stop slideshow socket, and here we need to cancel the slideshow. So socket assigns slideshow. This is the reference. And then we assign a new value to slideshow, which is stopped. Let's refresh the page and see if it works. There is a problem. So yeah, equal here. Okay, so these are our prevent next button, and let's click play. And you see how the slideshow works correctly. Let's try to stop it. Cool, let's go back by one. Let's press play again. Cool, it works.
So what's next? We've seen a lot in this episode, and you can find the code of the two modules, Gallery and Gallery Live, in the link in the description. And if you want the whole project's code, please let me know in the comments below, so I can, in that case, package it in a zip file or create a GitHub repository. You now can take a step forward. You can use the LiveView link and push state support. By the way, I made an episode on that. You find the link in the description. To bring the image ID in the URL and to update the URL when showing a different image. This gives you also a great way to share the link of a specific image.
As always, if you have any question or feedback, please let me know in the comments below. If you like this video and want to be updated when a new episode is available, please subscribe to this channel and to the Poetic Coding newsletter. Thanks for watching.